Hey guys, OGalbina here, bringing you guys another episode of Draft League City. We're going through all the typings, I believe 2 weeks ago, which week without videos, I'm sorry, just a very busy week, but we're back on track now. Last week, or last video we did was dark types, and it's kind of fitting that we go right into the fairy typing. Honestly, kind of the opposite of the dark type. I guess you could say psychic's the opposite, but another really important typing. Shout out to you guys who commented down below in the last video that you wanted to see fairy. If you want to see your favorite type next, comment down below what typing we should do next week. Water, fire, ground. There's so many big typings in the draft format that we have not covered yet. Or you could pick a sleeper one. You could say, like, let's talk about ice types because there's some cool ice types this gen. They got buffed. You know, anything like that, definitely let me know. I will pick what you guys want to see in the next video for sure. And yeah, with that being said, let's go ahead and jump into it. Fairy is a very interesting typing. It is definitely a typing in my mind that's required, and I feel like most people who have played draft for a while would agree with you. Just very solid defensive typing, gives you great checks to offensive fightings, offensive darks, which are very solid, especially in this gen where dark types are very important. It's good to have a check to those dark types that we talked about last week, but also having that dragon immunity, which is going to be very big, and they often fill really nice defensive roles that your team needs, like having that fat wish passer, having that cleric. A lot of them fill that cleric role, in all honesty. I think a good majority of them fill that cleric role if you really need them to. So that's obviously very clutch, but there's also some really offensive ones, ones that aren't as bulky, and something that definitely interested me when I was doing research for this video, and I didn't really think of before. There isn't as many good defensive fairies as I remember there being. There really isn't, which definitely interested me a lot because I feel like that's a requirement, and a lot of teams end up having to do that. But then when I was looking through, I kind of saw why a lot of teams end up with a very subpar, lacking fairy. We're going to kind of go over their typing. We're going to go over, you know, a little bit more why it's required. We're going to talk about its, you know, the typing's average, you know, stats for fully evolved Pokemon. And then we'll go over some really good ones in the format and what they do and things like that. So, with that being said, if you guys enjoy, drop a like. If you're new here, drop a sub. I'd really appreciate it. We're pushing towards 600. And if you could help me out along that journey, I would really appreciate it. So, let's go ahead and jump on. We will talk about the stats really quick. Oh my gosh, I forgot my face cam is right here. We're gonna do a little bit in video editing because I forgot this is where I typically do these videos. I hide up here. There we go. My bad, y'all. But yeah, we're going to rock out with fairy type Pokemon. Their average HP is going to be 75.22. The average attack is going to be 85.51. Average defense is going to be 89.24. The special attack is pretty darn high and 96.22, and then that Spadef is sky high and 101.20 and 77.88 speed. This kind of lines up, in all honesty. Now, there are physically attacking fairies like Mega Mawile sitting on your screen, but actually, funny enough, Mega Mawile doesn't have a very high base stat total. It's going to be huge power, pure power, whichever one it has. That's going to be making its attack skyrocket. Coco has a high attack stat. Azumarill, another really strong physically offensive fairy type, doesn't have high base stats. It's huge power. So typically they're going to be mostly special attackers, those you can see in the 96.22, and usually they'll have typically like just naturally strong special attack stats. There's Pokemon that just don't seem to be as strong as they really are, that are a lot stronger than you would think, just naturally. Like, for example, Pokemon like Florges. When I think of Florges, I actually think passive in my mind, and that's mostly because of its move pool, but I guess we can maybe talk about that a little bit later. And it has that fat Spadef stat, so that's what I think of, that 154 base Spadef, which is insane. But then you look at its special attack, that's base 112. Just that's the average stat. I mean, like, that's its just base special attack, no investment. Base stats is going to be 112, which is pretty insane when you think about it. A lot of them are naturally strong, and I think that is something to keep in mind. But like we said, with that Spadef stat, that might be the highest in the game. Again, we haven't done all the typings, and I haven't really like gone through and looked at every single typing, to be completely honest. But that might be the highest natural Spadef stat, which I think is very interesting for sure. Really forming that Spadef wall, monsters like Sylveon, Togekiss, Tapu, Feeny, things like that, which are going to be that fat Spadef wall. They're going to defensively check a ton of things, just blanket check a lot. And I think it's honestly best to just jump ahead right to that discussion about these Pokemon. And we're going to talk about defensive fairies first. The really good ones that I like. We'll kind of touch on other different ones after this as well. There are a few more. I only could fit 6 on the team builder, so we're going to do 6 defensive and 6 offensive. There's a little spoiler. And some of them can kind of function in both roles, which is awesome. Speaking of Mon that can function in a million roles, Clef, in my mind, probably the premier fairy in the format. It's not a Pokemon I've gotten to try too often because I usually draft pretty high tier offense a lot of the time, but I think Clef is amazing, obviously. Magic Guard, one of the best abilities in the game, allowing you to just not be damaged by indirect damage means, so toxic or rocks or spikes or anything like that. You're just immune to it, which is really, really clutch because it makes this 95, 73, 90 stat spread, which doesn't look very bulky, and that's something that's always tripped me out about Clef, is it just does not seem very bulky. But when you take that into account with Magic Guard and guarantee not taking any other chip and just investing fully in your bulk, this Pokemon just doesn't die. It's very tough to take down a Clef, especially when you have access to Calm Mind or even Cosmic Power Clef. Not only that, but you have that crazy Gen 1 coverage and Moonblast and Flamethrower and Thunderbolt and Ice Beam and all that cool stuff. You get Knockoff for great utility, which is really clever. You also get Wish and Heal Bell. This is a very reliable rocker. This Pokemon can realistically do it all in the hands of the right player. To be completely honest, like I said, another Pokemon that's very, very naturally strong if you think about it. Because 95, not the strongest in the world, but it's definitely no pushover. And when you couple in Magic Guard with, you know, a Life Orb or something like that, you're not taking that Life Orb chip, and you can still be physically defensive and then still have that Life Orb boost. It's a lot like Reuniclus sometimes does. If you don't need the leftovers, if you don't need some Resist Berry or something like that, it's typically going to be lefties with Clef. If you don't need that helmet for that physically offensive fighting, you can just slot on a Life Orb, so you do more damage to things that you typically wouldn't do a lot of damage to, or you get those 2-hit KOs on ones that had EV to not get 2-hit KO'd and things like that. Or you can start Calm Minding up and just be an absolute nuisance. Calm Mind, obviously Soft Boiled is a great means of reliable recovery as well. But you can function as that Wish Passer, as well as being that Unaware Mon, which is really cool. And another cool option I think Clef has this gen is going Heavy Duty Boots plus Unaware. One, kind of bluffing what your ability is, because typically in Generation 7 and 6 and Draft and things like that, you'd be able to tell Clef's ability when it came in and rocks were on the field, because it would either take rocks or it wouldn't, and that's how you determine it. Now there's a little bit more of a mind game of, am I unaware with boots, or am I just Magic Guard, which I think is really cool. Definitely a cool option for it. But it can be that Wish Passer. Like I said, it has Heal Bell as well as Aromatherapy, but I don't know, I always use Heal Bell because I think it looks cooler. But plenty of coverage, genuinely a jack of all trades. I've even seen Healing Wish Clef, which is awesome. I know it also gets Trick, so you can trick some really disadvantageous items onto your opponent, like a Sticky Barb or something like that. You can also rock out with Teleport for great negative momentum, minus priority momentum to get your free switch into your Breaker, which is again really clutch, or get a free wish into something guaranteed, which is again, mwah, absolutely clutch. So I think Clef is absolutely amazing. Really solid Pokemon. Probably the premier fairy. And kind of jump onto another great one in Feeny, and what Feeny lacks in reliable recovery, it makes up for in bulk. Look at this thing, man. 70 HP, 115 defense, 130 Spadef. This Pokemon's very annoying, and it kind of has like a pseudo Clef kind of thing where it can't really as easily be status, like this, you know, this Magic Guard right here, because of Misty Surge. And not only does Misty Surge provide Feeny that toxic block, or, you know, not getting burned or Thunder Waves, it does that for the rest of your grounded Pokemon, which can be really clutch on fat balance teams. I think Feeny plus a really solid Wish Passer is very difficult to beat. Feeny plus like a good Wish Passing normal, for example, is really solid. This Pokemon can win game on its own with, like, you know, Calm Mind. It got cool buffs in like Stored Power and Draining Kiss this gen, so if your opponent isn't well equipped to break through Feeny immediately, they can't really rely on status either, at least initially while that Misty Surge is up. You can really compound a lot of boost and be really annoying, especially with that really solid speed tier in 85, which is another really slept on aspect of Feeny. And still decent special attack in 95, which is another cool option. But you can also just be, you know, Moonblast, Scald if you want to burn things that are in the air, you're playing Terrain Wars or Surf, but you also have like Knockoff, you have Nature's Madness, and you also have Taunt, which I think is amazing on Feeny. Feeny is a phenomenal stall breaker. It really does bully a lot of fat teams, not in the way that's going to directly damage them. It's not breaking through your Chansey or Blissey, but it's going to be annoying. It's going to knock off its Boots or Eeveo. It's going to Nature's Madness. It's going to taunt you so that you can't recover up. It's just going to pepper you down and really annoy you. But this Pokemon is a great blanket check to so many different things. I really do like Feeny a lot. I know a couple of my buddies in Goons, they really do not think Feeny is very good, but I think this Pokemon is like incredibly slept on. At least in my friend group. I don't think the greater community thinks Feeny is bad. I think it's just my dumb friends. But I think Feeny is absolutely amazing, both in that sweeper role potentially, or in that just fat, annoying utility role. Also gets defog, though the only downside to defog is that you're defogging your own terrain away in the way Generation A mechanics work now, which is a little bit unfortunate. Something to keep in mind. And then I know something that's a little bit more popular in like standard Spogon metagames, but I've definitely seen it used in draft, is like Trick Scarf Feeny to, again, really bully fat, but as well have great natural coverage and be decently strong. And 85 isn't a bad speed tier for a Scarfer, so Scarf Feeny is definitely an option as well. I don't think I've necessarily seen like Specs or Life Orb Feeny, but I'd love to see someone try it. If you got to replay using like Life Orb or Offensive Feeny, I'd love to see it because I think that'd be hilarious. Next, we're going to see a Pokemon that I think these next two Pokemon typically go in every draft you're going to see. You typically see Clef and Feeny go, but I would more so bet on Sylveon and Togekiss go in every draft. One, because they're a little bit cheaper than the first two mentioned, but two, they're almost just as good as their defensive jobs. They lack a little bit more of that versatility that Clef and Feeny offer, but they do, again, make up for it in bulk. And we have Sylveon here. Fat spit up wall, but can function defensively, obviously, if you invest correctly and things like that. You're going to have to be max Fizz Def for a lot of those really, really strong offensive fightings, and you might struggle with them a little bit if they have like Jab or Gunk or Iron Head coverage, but obviously you can run with berries, you can pivot, you can do a lot of different things. It at least gives you that fighting and dark resist for sure, which is really, really clutch. But this thing, in conjunction with Wish and Protect and Heal Bell, is a very, very solid Wish passer, very solid HP stat as well, as high as Clef's, which is really clutch. Obviously passing pretty big wishes with max HP investment, as well as Calm Mind and getting Mystical Fire this gen, which I think is huge, because obviously a lot of fairies lost out on fire coverage and Hidden Power Fire last gen. So mons like Florges that I was talking about earlier are pretty darn passive in a lot of matchups because they just simply cannot touch steel types anymore. Like, at all. They really can't. They can't even pepper them for that 30% on that Hidden Power Fire. Sylveon is the opposite. It can Mystical Fire things and really chip them down that way. Obviously, that plus Hyper Voice, Pixelate boosted Hyper Voice is really, really strong. And this is a Pokemon, I kind of lied a little bit, I guess, because this Pokemon can definitely be run offensively. I've seen Specs Sylveon. I have not seen Specs Feeny, ever. I've seen offensive Sylveons. I've run, I think last week in RODL, that video would be going up. No, it already went up. It was against Tone. I ran like max speed Sylveon with like Wish, Hyper Voice, Mystical Fire, and Calm Mind, I believe. And I was like almost max speed, like very, very offensive, because I still have the natural bulk to take the hits I needed, which is really clutch. This Pokemon is very, very solid in that respect, obviously. I believe it gets Baton Pass for Momentum, which is another cool option if you do have that option on your team. It can yawn things, it can toxic things, it can be, it has Shadow Ball for weird mons and stuff like that. If you, end up really needing that coverage, it has dual screens, Magic Coat, great utility, and it just does its job so darn well, being that fast spit off wall, but also providing an offensive presence. Next up, we have the bane of every draft league player's existence in Togekiss. Togekiss is known realistically for flinching things with Air Slash, but it's still a very solid defensive fairy when you couple in the fact that heavy duty boots were introduced this generation. Now, it was great in Gen 7. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying Gen 7 Togekiss or Gen 6 Togekiss is shit. No, very good Pokemon still, but I think this kind of put it over the top. Not put over the top and breaking it. It just made it a lot better. Between Air Slash, Gleam, and Flamethrow's Flyer Blast, you have Roost for reliable recovery, as well as Wish. And I think that's a really slept on aspect of Togekiss, is it can function as that Wish passer. Just people typically don't do it. But I've run Togekiss so many times with like an Air Slash, Flamethrower, Roost, and then Wish is my 4th slot, because I didn't need Nasty Plot, I didn't need Defog or anything like that. I didn't need Thunder Wave. So I think that's a really, really slept on aspect of Togekiss that can really be used to, a good player's benefit a lot. But like I said, it does get Nasty Plot, it gets Roost for reliable recovery, it gets Thunder Wave to obviously Serene Grace, flinch things down. Just a very, very solid Pokemon. Another Pokemon with a very solid speed stat as well, which or a very solid speed stat to bully fat, which typically a lot of fairies are pretty slow, things like Clef and Sylveon, but base 80 is still very solid, or Wheezing, I guess, right here too. Base 80 is still very solid, very fast natural speed stat. It's I think it's overall a little, it's not as bulky as Sylveon from the Spadef side, but it has a lot more Fizz Def, which can be really, really clutch. Now this generation, you do have to worry about knockoff a little bit more, because you don't typically want to lose your boots, because then you come in on rocks, then you're into it KO range, things like that. But still really solid as a physically defensive fairy too, to check those offensive fighting, especially because you're a 4 times fighting resist opposed to a 2 times fighting resist, which is super clutch. You just got to be careful about knocks if you don't have a way to sufficiently get rid of rocks, or rocks will ruin your Togekiss or something like that. So just something to keep in mind, but again, an absolutely fun. Oh, Aurasphere too. I kind of forgot to mention that one too. So it's another option to hit. Not only hit steel types, I guess, is going to be the main thing. But next is Wheezing, and I have mixed feelings on Weezing. I've drafted a bunch. Sometimes I love it, sometimes I hate it. The thing that really holds back Weezing, in my opinion, is its lack of reliable recovery. And it doesn't have the utility or the bulk to make up for it like Feeny does. It has the physical bulk for sure. Yeah, it's about as bulky as Feeny on the physical side, being 10 points less in HP, but like 10 more in defense, or 5 more in defense. But it does not have that Spadef bulk. It's not as strong, it's not as fast. So not having that reliable recovery is a bit of a downside for me, but it has solid coverage in Poison, Fairy, and Fire. It's a lot of the metagame. Unless you're Heatran, there's not a lot of Pokemon that really like taking that. So even an offensive Weezing, I've run offensive Weezing before plenty of times, but it does have that Cleric option in Aromatherapy. It can Defog, it can Destiny Bomb, which is a really cool option. It can Haze. It can do a bunch of different cool things like that. It can taunt things, it can taunt really fast, and then it can set up T-Spikes as well, which is really, really clutch. And the real upside to Weezing, I think, is its ability to have 3 great abilities. Realistically, 2. I don't see a lot of Misty Surge Weezing, because typically it doesn't benefit too much. Teams don't benefit too much from drafting Misty Surge Weezing, but I have seen maybe a couple people draft Hawlucha with this on their team, and then they're like, I can use Misty Surge. But typically you're going to see Levitate, Neutralizing Gas, all phenomenal abilities in a draft league setting. You want to talk about a fairy that bullies other fairies, it is Weezing. Your Clefable, you can Toxic this thing through its Magic Guard, and then switch your Weezing in, and then Neutralizing Gas, and it starts taking Toxic damage and things like that, which I think is really cool. Or you can, you know, bring this in on a Gliscor and have it take a ton of Poison Heal damage, which is another really, really clutch aspect of Weezing. So it can be used really creatively in the right player's hands with Neutralizing Gas, but it's also a Poison type that's not weak to ground in some instances if you're really weak to the ground type, or it can be that grounded poison as well. So it really functions as a mediocre fairy, but a really solid poison type in my mind. But it's still defensive enough, and it's a fairy type, so I figured I would mention it here. The next couple Pokemon we're going to mention in defensive are going to be Pokemon that are defensive but can function offensively. The first one that comes to mind is Gardevoir. While its Fizz Def and HP are pretty lackluster, that Fat Spadef stat makes Fat Guard a really, really viable option. And I've seen physically defensive guard work in specific matchups for specific Pokemon, or just like having a lot of physical bulk to do things. But not only is obviously that Pokemon really, really bulky on the Spadef side and has a great speed stat in 100 for a fairy, but it also gets access to Wish and Calm Mind. It got Mystical Fire this gen, which is super, super clutch. Obviously throwing off big pixely boosted Hyper Voices and Psychics and Psyshocks. It can Taunt, it can Thunder Wave, it can Trick Room, it can do a bunch of cool different options like that. It can Will-O-Wisp things. I've seen Will-O-Wisp Tech Guard be an absolute nuisance for a lot of teams, really making up for that mediocre physical bulk, but then having that 165 special attack stat. If you're modest at level 100, you're in 471. There's not a lot of Pokemon that switch into Gardevoir in the metagame. Not a lot of Pokemon that can consistently switch into this thing, throwing off Moonblast, or not Moonblast, that's regular Gardevoir. Hyper Voices, Psychic, Psyshocks, Focus Blasts, Mystical Fires, Shadow Balls, a bunch of different options like that, to where this Pokemon is genuinely terrifying to deal with. And I've definitely seen Fat Calm Mind Guard, or just, you know, different options like that do a lot of work. I've even seen Charge Beam Guard do a lot of work. But you have Thunderbolt for things like Skarm and especially Shelly and things like that, and Corviknight, which is another cool option. So Guard is another Pokemon that can function in a fat role, but can definitely be offensive if you need it to. I'm trying to think if there's any other ones. I know I have to give an honorable mention to, what do you call it? Where is it? Whimsicott. Whimsicott's a very solid Pokemon in the draft format. It's not the bulkiest thing in the world, but the utility that this thing offers, which is 116 base speed, is phenomenal. That plus Prankster is great. It gets U-turn for momentum. It can Memento. It can Screens up. Does it get Reflect? I'm pretty sure it gets Reflect. No, it only gets Light Screen, which is a little bit unfortunate, but it can Light Screen up at least. It can Tailwind, it can Taunt, it can Toxic. I've seen Sub-Leech Whimsicott just solo teams before because the person didn't prep for it very well. It gets Knockoff, and there are certain matchups where offensive Whimsicott with like a Life Orb can make up for this really bad special attack stat and make it really difficult to switch into. If your opponent doesn't have a good steal, you can run out with that. And then Prankster Encore is such a valuable tool in a draft league metagame. I know Dr. Slacking is like his favorite mon to use, and I get it. I actually really like Whimsicott. It's definitely not the best defensive fairy, but if positioned correctly and used correctly, it can definitely be an absolute nuisance for a lot of teams to deal with. And let's see, is there any other defensive fairies I want to talk about? I can kind of like scroll through them and like mention them lightly, because a lot of these are mediocre, and that's kind of what I was talking about, where like a lot of these can function as defensive fairies, and a lot of these will get drafted because there's simply not a lot of great defensive fairies. You know, at least in my mind. Maybe I'm being a little meh. Mega Alt is another great Pokemon, actually. I love Mega Alt. Only issue is that it's your Mega. And there are usually a lot better Megas around, but it definitely can function defensively or offensively. And offensively from both sides of the spectrum, which is really, really clutch. It can DD, it can just throw off big hyper voices and fire moves, or it can throw off earthquakes and body slams or facades, or it can throw off big cotton guards and just not die, be a defogger, do a ton of things, which is clutch. Alcremie, pretty bad. Look at that Fizz Def, plus it's really bad speed. It's good from the speed F side, but I'm not a big fan. Aromatisse, I do like Aromatisse. It can function really well as a defensive fairy. It just suffers from that same thing as Florges, where it's very passive in a lot of instances. Comfey, great utility fairy, not the bulkiest thing in the world, but I really do like Comfey a lot. I've drafted it a few times as my fairy. What else can we talk about? Grimmsnarl is good as a screener. I'm not a fan of it as a fairy. Granbull can function somewhat bulky with an Assault Vest, but it's typically more offensive. Klefki, not the bulkiest fairy in the world, but the utility is great, like I said, with Prankster. Ninetales, screen support, which is nice. Rabombi is web support. Shiinotic is a slept-on mon. I actually really like Shiinotic. Slurpuff is another mon I actually really like that I think can function offensively and defensively. Obviously, you have Calm Mind and Belly Drum sets and things like that. But I've run Fat, Wish Protect, Rocky Helmet, Slurpuff before. I've run Sticky Web, obviously, because it's another great option. So it's a very versatile Pokemon. Its stats are a little bit lacking, but if invested correctly, you can definitely take on those offensive fightings that you need to take on, which is, again, very clutch. So, Tapu Bulu, as much as I like him, he's not a fairy type. And yeah, I think that's really about it. From here, let's talk about the cool ones, the offensive ones. And these ones, some of these can function defensively. I'll just say it right now. Prim can definitely function defensively. I've seen Coco function defensively. Regular DNC, that's not Mega D, I guess I forgot to talk about it just a second ago, can definitely function very defensively. Lacks recovery, but very, very bulky. But for the most part, these Pokemon are going to be run very offensively, they're going to be played very aggressively, and they're here to click buttons, claim lives, and be nuisances. The first one that comes to mind when I think offensive fairy type, I think Mega Mawile. You have that 105 base attack, which is pretty good, but then you couple in the huge power, and this Pokemon has no switch-ins. This is a Pokemon, I've talked about Urshifu before, where I think people think Urshifu is broken and bannable because they're looking for switch-ins to everything. They're looking for a Pokemon that switches in and takes the hit from them consistently. I think that those don't really exist for Urshifu, but I think it can be exploited defensively. Its defenses can be exploited, its mediocre speed tier can be exploited, things like that. But I think Mawile to an even more extreme example, because Urshifu can actually be checked by a lot of the fairies that we have, soft checked by things like Clef, Feeny, Sylveon, Togekiss, Weezing, things like that, obviously. Whereas Mega Mawile, and has an even worse speed stat, pretty decently mediocre bulk with that 50 HP. It's not the best, though, for sure, and there's definitely weaknesses that can be exploited, but Steel Fairy is obviously a better defensive typing than Fighting Dark. But this Pokemon has even less switch-ins. I challenge you to find me a Pokemon that consistently always switches in to Mega Mawile in its coverage. Okay, have you looked? Nothing. I don't think anything can consistently switch into Mega Mawile. Now, do I think it should be banned? No, I don't, because I think the speed tier is exploitable, and I think its defenses can be exploited. That's my main thing, is I don't think every Pokemon needs to be checked defensively for it to not be broken. And Mega Mawile is the perfect example of this. I remember back in the day, in like early Gen 7, a lot of leagues banned Mega Mawile. And I'm pretty sure in Gen 6 too, but I didn't really play back then, so I can't really comment on that. But a lot of leagues banned Mega Mawile because they're like, I don't have a switch-in for it. It's broken. Now, I would be hard-pressed to find a standard league, not a tour, in like 8-Mon, because I think that's a little bit different. I'd probably ban Urshifu and Mawile in an 8-Mon tour as well, potentially. Definitely Urshifu. I think that Mon 8-Mon is insane. But in a typical, like 11 Mon League, let's just, say, just throw out an arbitrary number like that, I would be hard-pressed to find Mega Mawile banned at this point. And I think it has more offensive potential than Urshifu, 100%. Between Knockoff, Play Rough, Iron Head, Fire Fang, Ice Punch, Thunder Punch, Rock Slide, Sword Stance obviously to boost up, and then Sucker Punch for priority. You have Psychic Fangs. You have so many different options. You can also Stealth Rock up, but I hate using Stealth Rock Mega Maw. It makes me so upset whenever I see it. Not because it's bad. It's just like, I have a Mega Mawile. I don't want to click Stealth Rock. I want to click Attacks because this Pokemon doesn't have switch-ins. So I think that's something that people who are like pro Urshifu ban to maybe think about. I think if you think Urshifu should be banned, that Mawile isn't too close behind in that argument. Personally, if you're like, it does not have switch-ins. Neither does Mawile. But I love Mawile. It's really, really solid. I kind of went off on a tangent right there. I kind of indirectly talked about why it's so good. And it can't be explained. It's obviously not the bulkiest fairy in the world, but God, is this thing strong. It is so unbelievably strong. I've even seen like Focus Punch Mawile go crazy before. Coco, one of my absolute favorite mons. The king of Gen 7 draft. Had a little bit of a fall from grace, obviously, with Power being gone, Electric Terrain being nerfed this generation, and Z-Moves being gone. However, it's still phenomenal. I think Coco plus the item not Heavy Ball. Sorry, I always do that. Whatever I build, I literally always do that. Heavy duty boots. This thing functions as a phenomenal pivot with U-turn and Volt Switch, which is a really, really clutch combination. Then you have obviously Thunderbolt and Dazzling Gleam. You can Calm Mind, you can Iron Fence, you can store power through things, you can Taunt, you can Nature's Madness. There's so many different options that Coco has. You can Defog, which is really clutch. You have Grass Knot for a lot of grounds, which is something that makes this thing, still very, very good. Is the fact that it can still at least touch grounds, which is great. I've seen some Toxic Coco go crazy. I've seen so many different Coco sets do so well because it's such a good Pokemon. It has dual screens as well, so it can function as a screener on HO. Realistically, it's just that speed stat allowing it to be so deadly. Obviously, very mediocre special attack stat, but when you couple that with the Electric Surge and you get a Calm Mind Up or your Life Orb or your Specs Coco, it's going to be hitting a lot harder. The physical attack is obviously a lot higher, but you don't have the same coverage that you have on the physical side that you do on the special side. And the special coverage is already lacking, so the physical coverage isn't going to be great. But I've definitely seen physical Coco when someone thinks they can bring their G-King, their AV G-King in to wall the Coco. They get bopped by a Choice Band Wild Charge and take like a ridiculous amount of damage. So that's just something to keep in mind. I definitely think Coco's very solid. I wish it got Play Rough in close combat like we thought it was going to get, and Rising Voltage. If it also got Rising Voltage, those things that we thought it was going to get before, oh man, that was a fun time. I played in a couple leagues where we played off of the leaks that we thought were going to be true, and a couple of them were wrong. One of which being Coco and Lele, which I guess we can talk about in a second, where people thought I got Rising Voltage, Close Combat, and Play Rough, and it immediately shot back up to the best Pokemon in the format again. Immediately shot back up. So if only it did, but it's still very, very solid. Still a great round 1 pick. Just not the best Pokemon in the format anymore, at least, in my mind. Lele, I guess another, its offensive counterpart, Tapu. Definitely still very strong. Again, also got nerfed this generation in Psychic Surge being nerf, which made this thing a lot allowable, which is definitely cool. Typically, you didn't see Lele. I remember I used Gen 7 Lele in Elite, and it's weird how much of a power difference it is between 1.3 and 1.5 times in the Psychic Surge, or in the Psychic Terrain. This Pokemon was insane in Gen 7. Now, it's still very good. It's still very strong. Obviously, the stats of Psychic Fairy is really solid when you have coverage like Focus Blast. I believe it also got... Did it get Mystical Fire? I don't remember. It didn't get Mystical Fire, but it has Focus Blast, which is really clutch. It can Shadow Ball things. If only it got Expanding Force like we thought, it'd be crazy. But it can Thunderbolt, it can Calm Mind. I've seen Calm Mind Store Power Drain Kiss sets go crazy as well. And I've seen even, I ran one time when I had it in Gen 7, I ran like a Scarf Aromatherapy set. It was like my 4th move because I was like, Cleric, which is really cool. You can run Iron Defense sets as well. It doesn't do them as well as the other Tapus in my mind, but they can definitely still run them, which is clutch. But as Pokemon, it's typically going to be used in one role, and it's going to be as a breaker or a Revenge Killer with Scarf. It's going to be Specs, Scarf, or Life Orb in so many different matchups. I've seen AV Lele do well as well, but doesn't have insane coverage, but it has the coverage that it needs to function well in the role that it's given. So that's going to be Lele. Diancie, Mega Diancie. This is probably my favorite offensive fairy. This thing, I loved it in Gen 7. I drafted it so many times, and then this gen they gave it Mystical Fire, which is so nice. They also gave it Play Rough, which I think is a really slept on option, because if you look at Diancie, you think it's a special attacker. That's 160 in both attacking stats, which is nuts. We talk about Guard being strong. It's just got 160 in one of them, or 165 in one of them. This has got 160 in both, with a 110 base speed, 110 base bulk, the HP. Pretty lackluster, but you will live the hits that you need to. You're typically not dying to a neutral hit unless it's like a ridiculously strong one, but still incredibly solid. It gets rocks, it gets Calm Mind. I've seen Magnet Rise sets do really well because of its speed, being faster than a lot of grounds, and that's all they cover. Encore is a really clutch option with Dia, with its speed, obviously really bullying fat and things like that. You can Heal Bell, you can Calm Mind, like I said, you can Baton Pass, which is really Clef. It got Mystical Fire. It also has Earth Power, so it has plenty of ways to hit the Pokemon that can potentially switch into its dual stabs, which again, really solid. And Rock Polish, obviously, for sweeping options as well. You can go Psychic coverage for fat poisons that might want to check you and things like that. This Pokemon is genuinely amazing. I love Mega DNC. It's such a hard Pokemon to build for, and it's so easy to use. You just click buttons. It's really, really solid. It forces very specific switches. They can also be exploited by the team and things like that as well. And then if it's not a first-turn Mega League, which it shouldn't because it's 2021, first-turn Mega League shouldn't exist. If it's not first-turn Mega, and then you can obviously use regular DNC's bulk in its pre-evolved form. Obviously, we can show that off. Obviously, a lot bulkier with base 50 HP, but then 150 in its defenses to facilitate that setup option where you want to throw off a Calm Mind or a Rock Polish or something like that, which is, again, really, really nice. Diamond Storm is obviously a very, very clutch tool as well. It's nothing like, you know, a fat Spadef wall coming in trying to take a Moonblast, and you throw off a max attack Diamond Storm and just 2-hit KO the hell out of him while getting a defense boost. Obviously, you're 4 times weak to Steel. That means a lot of Bullet Punch coming your way, but if you build and construct a team properly around DNC, it can be an amazing centerpiece, and I definitely recommend you try it if you haven't. Azu, this is a Pokemon that can kind of be used in both ways. I think AV Azu is definitely very, very solid, but it can also obviously be choice banned with Aqua Jet Priority and Play Rough and Knockoff and Liquidation, things like that. Or it can rock out with like Belly Drum sets if you can position properly, or you can even be that guy. You can run Thick Fat or Sap Sipper, typically Sap Sipper. You can be Leftovers, something like that, and you can run Whirlpool, Perish Song, Protect, Rest, something like that. I don't know, some fourth move, maybe Scald, something like that, which is obviously very, very solid. Now, you have no offensive preference if you're not huge power, which is something to keep in mind. Absolutely none, but it has that versatility where it can be used in different ways, and 180-80 isn't that bad of bulk. And like I said, I think AV Azu is actually a really, really solid set. I love AV Azu in a lot of matchups because it's hard to switch around. And when you pack in that AV, it can be a nice, really nice, especially defensive pivot, and offers really good priority for a team. I haven't tried Azu, but it's definitely a Pokemon I wouldn't be opposed to drafting. Now, I typically do think you want to draft another water, at least, with Azu, because I wouldn't want it to function as a bulky water. I could probably get by with it as my fairy, but not as my water, if that makes sense, as long as they good wish. But, yep. And then lastly, another water fairy to close it off in Primarina. It's a Pokemon that, again, has very solid bulk in 80, 74, 116, so a lot of Spadef, but is so ridiculously strong. What is that, 134? Or 126, sorry. You can throw off big specs boosted Moonblast and Hydro Pumps and Scalds and Surfs and Ice Beams, which is great as well. You can throw off Energy Balls for some reason, because yeah, you get Energy Ball because you're a starter. You get all the cool moves. You get Flip Turn this generation for Momentum. I got a lot of cool buffs this gen. One being Flip Turn, the other being Calm Mind, another being Draining Kiss. So really, really solid Pokemon in all honesty. Can do a ton of different things for your team. Hidden ability isn't great, but this Pokemon is very solid overall, and I would definitely draft this as a water fairy, for sure. Again, probably with better wish support, but still very solid Pokemon nonetheless. And yeah, that's gonna be the fairy type. I kind of rambled. It's been 30 minutes. My bad. But the fairy typing is obviously a very important typing. I think you need it on every team, in some way, shape, or form, at least to deter opponents from running Scarf, Moxie, Mints, and clicking Outrage or something like that. No, I would recommend getting a good one so your opponent respects it. I wouldn't recommend you drafting Swirlix as your fairy, but you know, as long as you have one, I think you're a little bit more well off. And yeah, they function in a ton of different ways, whether it be fat and defensive, or it be incredibly offensive and scary, or whether it be somewhere in the middle like these guys right here. But yeah, that's gonna be the video. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, I really do implore you to drop a like, and if you're new here, please drop a sub. I'd really appreciate it. And yeah, with that being said, see you guys in the next one. Later.